Hi, I'm taking Paul McWhorter's AI for Everyone lessons and his VPython lessons. Over on the VPython side, we this week we were talking about widgets and user interfaces for our VPython programs that we were doing. VPython has some built-in widgets that we can use to interact with the program while it's running. Um, uh, CV2 or OpenCV has very limited ways to interact with it. You can do track bars and you can get keyboard keystroke inputs as well. But eventually I want to turn my AI into a mobile platform where we can do different things, like follow a ball or chase after a ball with a certain color, or check out somebody's poses, or maybe get some face recognition going, or even after we hook it up with the Arduino, maybe have some type of room mapping thing. That's my vision for it anyhow. To do all that, I think I'm going to need a nice user interface, a GUI, for doing that. And I was thinking about, really couldn't do it with what the resources we have. So I was looking around. There's several Python GUI libraries out there, but the one that's built in, it comes with the Python distribution, is Tkinter. I think that's how you pronounce it, Tkinter. It's been around a long time, and it's got some good reviews, some bad reviews, but the latest, it's up to version 8.5, and I think the update is a pretty good version of it. I'm sure I haven't checked out and just glanced at some of the other libraries out there, but this one built in, so seemed like it was low-hanging fruit, so that's what I'm using, that one. I just wanted to test it out and see if it actually, I'd found where others had made it work with OpenCV, so I said, well, we'll have to give it a try and see how that works. So we'll get on to the code now. So this is my lesson 22, where we just have where we added the bounding boxes. And this code also, this is just my basic code where we're using the MP helper module to store all our work with the media pipe controls and classes. So it's kind of short, so I felt that was a really good place to try out my Tkinter without having mal a program. So there is some differences with Tkinter. You're not allowed to use a while true, which at first I said, well, that's a deal breaker. But then looking around, and other people have showed how to do it without it. This is what we normally do, and this is how we're interacting with it, these first lines of code here. And then the CV2 lines all the way down are the way that OpenCV puts it on into a window. And it turns out that Tkinter, you can actually put it in what they call frames, and you can put that into a frame doing that. So and if you we'll talk about this here, we have this wait key in that lets the program check to see if any key presses are pressed. So we got something similar over on the Tkinter one. So then we'll show you some changes that we have to make for that. So, all right. So we, like I said, we can't do the while true. So what we do is, it turns out the same, but we have a function, and you call it whatever you want, but I called mine my loop. And the that's what we have to do to run that. The base why we have to do that is because Tkinter, the last line of all Tkinter code has to be this. The root is our main screen, our main topmost frame that we have to use. So, and then we use that, and we have to run this main loop, and it has to run uninterrupted. I mean, it has to be running. I don't know exactly how uninterrupted it is, but we have to allow to let it run. But anyhow, we call our my loop down here next to the last line, and it goes up and it runs this. And we'll talk about what's going on, but our wait key over in OpenCV, this is a very similar thing here, that you're waiting 10 milliseconds for the main loop to check any changes in your graphical user interface. And then you're doing that, and then after 10 milliseconds, you're just going back up and doing my loop again. So it's almost the same process. It's just not a while true, but it's a repeating loop, and it's just allowing 10 milliseconds each time through to check for user interface interactions and to take care of them. Of course, you can't really, if you want to have responsive interface, you can't put any delays or in your code here to do that. It has to run multiple times a second so that it doesn't drag your user interface where it's not usable. So all the CV2 stuff past here got replaced. So we'll go back to here. So we got our put text up here that put our frames per second on there, but these lines here we no longer need. Like I say, the wait key, we're doing that, and we're handling our quit with a button now. I'll show you that when we get to it. But IM show and the move window and all that we don't need. So what we're doing is everything after this put text is what the way we have to do it. Tkinter has a helper functions in the pill library. That's not a built-in library, but luckily with OpenCV that uses pill as well. So we import that, was already imported because we had the OpenCV imported. So while we're up here, this is Tkinter. You're importing everything, and then this TTK. I read up on all. This is the newer version or something that it used to not have this part, and this is the updated version, uses this TTK thing. So, and then this is for taking care of images in the Tkinter thing. So, all right, we'll go back to our main, to our loop, to my loop, not a while true anymore. So we're still have our frame, right? So then we're using converting it from the BGR to a RGB A is what they showed. I didn't try it, but I bet it would work the same if you took that A out. But then we're converting the, we're in OpenCV, we're using NumPy arrays. So this is still a NumPy array like that. And then this line is one of the pillow things, and it changes the array into an image. And then the Tkinter thing needs it as a Tkinter image. So we have to put this line in, and then another line to tell it what to do, and then another line to tell it what to do. I haven't, like I said, this is brand new to me, so I just copied and pasted these from another example code that I found online, and it works well. So I don't know what each one of those do and individually, but that's what seems to be needed to get it to work. So I rather like to know what I'm doing. So eventually, I guess I'll figure out what each one of those is doing. But for now, just happy that it's working. Okay, so what I wanted to do for this test on using an interface is, like I said, we're going to put a button in for the quit, but then I wanted check boxes for whether to run the certain parts, like our bounding boxes for the faces, our pose, and then our hands, and have a checkbox to see which, if we're using one or another or all three of them. So we're using checkboxes to do that. And if you're doing Paul's VPython classes, some of them are kind of almost familiar. It's a different way of doing it, but there's some things to do. So this is our, well, let's start at the top instead of going right into the widget part of it. You set up your GUI. This is, a lot of it is based in frames. So you have frames that you can put on your screen, and you can divide up your frames. You can have frames and subframes inside, parent and child frames all the way down. And then I'll put links to how all that works, to where the documentation of what I read. They do a much better job explaining than I do, but you end up, you start with a frame, and then you're using this grid thing, and that's how they place your other frames and then your widgets later on in these frames. So the GUI frame is a frame that encompasses the whole GUI window. And then the grid is just blank in that one because it's the only thing in there. And then we have a control frame. And down here later, we have an image frame. So the control frame is you put what the parent is of that. So our parent frame is our main GUI frame, and so that's where that. But then our grid, we use a column and row. It just divides it like a tic-tac-toe board into columns and rows of where you put it. So I wanted the control frame at the top. So we're not worried about rows on this one. So we're putting the column equals 0. And if you come back down here to the image frame, we're doing the same thing. It's got the same parent. And we have some other attributes. We're giving it the size of the window. But then our grid is actually with columns we don't care about. It's the rows that we care about. So we're using row 1. So row 1 is greater than row 0. So it's going to be below it on the frame. I misspoke. We're using rows for that, not columns. columns are across, rows are up and down. So, all right. And so we just set that control frame. And then we're putting our controls, these would be our widgets. We're putting them in our control frame. I mean, we could, so we put them in there, and they work similar to what the VPython control, widgets do. You have a check button that we can use, and you can put a text in it. But what they do is they have a variable that is tied to it. It's already a global variable. Actually, to access it, you got to use a get function to do that. So you can either set it or get it. So you can actually change this variable depending on what you want to do in your code. But each one of your things has to have a variable, and it's either text or Boolean or whatever. Whatever's suitable for the thing. For a check button, I wanted a Boolean as a variable there. And then same way, check button, then you just you create one, and then you put a grid. And now we're on the column side, because everything's going to be, you can see each one of these is rows, but then we got column 0, column 1, column 2, and then column 3 down here. So they're going to be in the same horizontal because they're 0 in the row, but they'll be spaced out based on their column number, which one comes first and second. And this padding just tells you you can put space between them so that they're not all bunched up. There's other attributes that you can use to make them justified to the left and right and top and bottom, but I didn't have to use any of that in this first beginner one. So this is just, I have 3 check buttons, and we're just using to, and then the text is, whether it's a face bounding box, whether we want to show the body pose, and whether we want to show the hands. And like I said, we can have any or all of those, any combination of those on. And then they actually, because we're just using their variable attribute, we don't need any command. They call it a command instead of a function to go to. For these, you're just using the variable value, so you don't actually have any. You could have, if you needed it, you could have a command as well for these, but I just didn't need it. So we didn't need a function to go. But for our quit button, we did. So this is how you do a button, and you could have other attributes as well. You could change the size of it, which, if you wanted a bigger button or something, but this is whatever the defaults are, seem to work okay. And again, we just put this will be the column 3, so it's going to be the rightmost button on our thing. So when we click it, it'll go run this function, and we want to release the cam, and then to quit the program, you just destroy the root, the whole thing, and that'll quit your screen and get you back to Python without having any hangups. So one thing you can also, the Tkinter can certainly check for keystrokes and as well, and there's lots of other things that it can do. But I just figured a button for quitting was better than just a Q or something like that, and more of a user interface graphic instead of keystrokes. All right, so getting down now, we have an image frame, and it's kind of strange, but our images go in a label. So that's how a label can either be text or it can be an image, and you're just stretching this to a 640 by 360 label, and you're putting your you know you're putting the label in the image frame, and it's the only thing in there, so it's 00, because to make any of these show, you have to give it a grid position. If you leave this off, this grid position, then it won't show up at all. Even though you've made it, this makes it show. That's the way that setting up the user interface. What, 15 lines of code or something, maybe, or 20 lines of code to do that. You're going to have some overhead when you're trying to make it look good. So, and then we just had to put an if statement in here that we're only running our face boxes or our pose or our hand array if the B1, so the checkbox 1 gets this variable. And so we got the B1 variable, and that's how you access it in a global way. And so it's you just B1 get, and that'll return. For these, it returns, since they're Boolean, true or false. So if it's true, it's going to run this. If it's false, if it's checked, it's true. And if it's true, then it's going to run this. Same way, if B2 is true, it's going to run that. If B3 is true, it's going to run that. And at the end, we're putting our frames per second. So that's what we wanted to do here. And then we already went over that. So I guess the thing to do now is to show this running. I think we're ready to go. So not really impressive, other than the fact that we're doing something that OpenCV can't do on its own. So it's kind of cool. Right now, we got nothing checked up here. So it's not, all it's doing is doing the webcam and putting a frame per second in there. So we can click on one of these, and all of a sudden you're starting to use the bounding box. And then you can get the body pose, add in the body pose. Even add in the hands as well. You can see our frame per second, and I already showed this. So this is all 3 of them together, and then you can take one of them out if you want. So we still got our face bounding box, and we got our hands, but we don't have any pose going on. So like I said, this is just a test, and tests kind of worked out really well, and we can show that our quit does what it's supposed to do. And, so you can do a lot of stuff. You can do menus. You can do pretty much create a functional web page out of, not a web page, but a functional application out of this by doing that, by using the Tkinter. I think I might play around with a couple of the other ones to see if maybe they're a little bit, if they'll even work, and how, whether they might be easier to use or whatever. This one was straightforward with the documentation. Let me see if I got access to the documentation. I'm going to leave links to it in there, but here's the Tkinter docs. So you got all this this whole thing here. So there's quite a bit to go through on this. I mean, and You see, we have the images down here, and that's where I found out how to work with the images. And it really didn't do the webcam and the OpenCV, so I just did a Tkinter OpenCV and a couple Stack Exchange and other code examples came up, so it was good. So this is actually the Stack Exchange one that I use mainly, and this guy, somebody asked a question, they couldn't get it to work, and this guy just posted this, and I used a lot of what he does. This was a 2017, so some of the libraries have actually changed how you open them up and everything. The newer libraries. This one doesn't have the TTK on it, so I'm sure supposedly everything backwards compatible, but this is using updated as Windows changes, or it'll work on Apple as well, or Linux. But as they change, they had to keep updating their way they did things with Tkinter. So supposedly it's in pretty good place right now. And like I said, lots of, I'll post at least this one on there, and probably a couple other links to it if anybody's interested in trying it out on their own. Anyhow, so that's what I got. So yes, we can do GUIs with OpenCV and make something fairly nice. I look forward to using that on my mobile platform. Thanks, Paul, for all you do. You gave us a great foundation to keep building on what you've started. Thanks again. Talk to you later.